Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my yard in Los Angeles, California. How is everybody doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, and having some fun. Today on Critter Chat, we're going to talk about an amazing little animal that is considered to be one of the most beautiful and cute, adorable animals out there. Today we're going to talk about red pandas. Now, for starters, when they were first discovered and described by scientists, which happened about 50 years before giant pandas were described, there was a word in the Tibetan language, I believe, or Nepal, one of those languages, that sounded somewhat like panda, called panya. And so it was probably misunderstood, misinterpreted, and that's probably where the word panda came from. Panda didn't specifically have a meaning as a word at that time. It was first, red pandas were first described by a French scientist who used Greek words to describe them as a species that meant fire-colored cat. Similarly, the words used in Chinese to describe red pandas means fire fox. So in both cases, people kind of liked the color of them, felt that that was fire related, and didn't really know where they fit into other animals, which is still a bit of confusion even today, although they think they've figured it out. Red pandas are kind of medium-sized animals. Their body length is usually between 20 and 25 inches long, so about 2 feet in length, with a tail that is another foot or 1.5 feet in length. Males are larger than females. Males weigh in between 10 and 15 pounds. Females would weigh closer to like 7 to 10 pounds. Their long tail they use for balance and also for warmth in the wintertime. Where they live, it does get pretty cold. In parts of their range, it is icy and snowy. Other parts of their range, not so much. So it kind of depends on the individual and where they live. They live in the forest at the foothills of some of the world's tallest mountains. They live kind of at the base of the Himalaya mountains and other tall mountains in Central Asia. So the countries they live in include China, Nepal, Bhutan, India, and Myanmar. There are two different types of red pandas, kind of a western subspecies and an eastern subspecies, with the eastern subspecies being a bit bigger and a bit more red in color. And the forest that they live in is largely this stuff, bamboo. And bamboo is very, very important to red pandas. It's also very important to giant pandas as it is what they eat for the majority of their food. Both giant pandas and red pandas are bamboo eaters. Because they both eat bamboo, it was long thought that they must be closely related. They also both have little paws that they grab things with, and they don't have thumbs like we have, but they use part of their wrist bone that's kind of elongated, kind of as a fake thumb. So they can kind of grab things and carry them a little bit using their wrist and the rest of their digits. Both giant pandas and red pandas have that. Both of them eat bamboo. And so for a while, scientists thought that this smaller creature must be some kind of bear and must be related to the bigger black and white one that also eats bamboo. And that isn't true. They're not bears, so they're no longer classified as bears. After they decided they weren't bears, they thought maybe it's a raccoon. It kind of looks like a raccoon. It's about that size. It has kind of a similar face, has rings on its tail. So it really made for a good argument. It also washes things sometimes. It'll wash its face with its paws. It will put its paws in the water before it drinks. Sometimes washes its food. So those are things that raccoons do. So that made sense for a while too. And for a long time, they were classified as being a close relative of raccoons. And then as science progressed and things like DNA analysis and genetics became a little more easy to study, they did some good scientific research And they realized that although they're very distantly related to bears and they're distantly related to raccoons, which are both in the bigger group of animals called the carnivore order, typically meat eaters, red pandas are in a family all by themselves. They don't really have a close relative. And today they are given the family name of Aluridae, which is derived from that Greek word which meant fire cat years and years ago. So today they are considered a carnivore, which is also kind of interesting because they don't really eat much meat. They mostly, 98% of what they eat is this, the leaf off of a bamboo. But the giant pandas don't really eat meat either, and they are also considered carnivores. Animals are typically grouped in the carnivore grouping because of their skull shape, size, and their teeth. And both giant pandas and red pandas have more in common with the rest of the carnivores than they do with other species elsewhere. So they are grouped with the carnivores, although they don't really eat meat. Like the carnivores, they have a very simple stomach and digestive tract, which is a little bit of a problem for a plant eater because plants can be very difficult to digest. And being a carnivore, they have a pretty simple digestive system. So red pandas eat a ton of bamboo leaves, between 2 and 4 pounds, which is quite a lot of food for an animal that only weighs about 10 pounds. And in one study, they were tracking female red pandas who had cubs, and they were eating 20,000 bamboo leaves a day. So they can really, really eat a lot of food. But they don't get that much nutrition from it. They can only digest about 25% of what they eat. And so they kind of eat a lot more than they actually can gain nutrients from. In addition to eating bamboo, they do occasionally eat some other things. Those would be some nuts, some flowers, some fruits, and occasionally some things like some insects, maybe a bird's egg, maybe a little bird, maybe another little animal. So they do on occasion eat some meat, although it is pretty rare. They are absolutely tree dwelling. So they stay up in the trees in the forest where they live, very rarely coming to the ground unless they need to get a drink from some water, like a stream, or if they have to cross a big area where there isn't trees that they can connect in the branches up above. When an animal lives up in the trees, that is called arboreal. So arboreal, arbor being trees, arboreal, up in the trees. They spend most of their time up there, and although they have that bright red fur in that area of Central Asia, many of those trees have a kind of moss that grows in the trees that is also similar in that reddish color. There's also some little white spots that grow on the trees called lichens. And lichens in that area are also similar. So even though they're bright red and white, they can blend in a bit with their surroundings up in the trees in that forest. Where they live, their forest is typically quite cool. There are some that live kind of more in a tropical setting, a little further south in the India area, in India and Nepal. But where they live is usually higher elevation. It's kind of a cooler forest with summer temperatures kind of barely reaching like the 70-degree mark. And definitely it gets cold enough in the winter that it snows and gets a bit icy. During their summertime, they'll be active at night looking for their food. During the spring, fall, and winter, they're more crepuscular, which again, that is active at dawn and dusk, trying to get their food kind of in those time frames, taking a nap during the middle of the day when it may be a little warmer, and then sleeping through the night during the cold winter months. They are largely solitary, so they live on their own. They typically don't hang out with each other unless it is breeding season. Then two adults may gather. Sometimes she still has cubs in tow from the year prior. Sometimes there may be one or two males trying to breed with her at the same time. So they can sometimes be in small groups for a couple of days, but it's usually very short-lived, although the babies stay with their mom for about a year or a little more. With them living solitary in a big forest, each red panda typically has a home range about a square mile. So they kind of need a decent amount of space per individual animal. And they mostly communicate with others of their kind through scent marking, through their pee, their poop, and they actually have a very special scent gland that leaves a very particular scent around that they can kind of detect who lives there, if that's a male, if that's a female, if it's a female with babies, all of those good things. When they come in closer contact with each other, they do communicate a little bit with some facial expressions and also a bit of vocal noises that they can make. Particularly babies can make kind of like a whistle sound to get their mom's attention, and they'll make some little chirps, squeaks, grunts, and if they're scared they can kind of growl a little bit. But by and large they're pretty quiet. After breeding, the mom is usually pregnant, or her gestation period is between 95 and 145 days. And if that sounds like a pretty big gap between those time frames, it is. That's between like 3 months and almost 5 months. That is because they have the ability to do something called delayed implantation. That's common in maybe about, I don't know, a quarter of the mammal species out there can do that. It's typically for animals who may have habitat stresses and who live in very sparse or low densities. So after they breed, their body can kind of determine, is there enough nutrition in the area? Is this the right time to be having a baby? Can we commit this amount of resources to having a baby? And if so, then cool, they become pregnant and have a baby. If not, they delay that and say, we're gonna wait a couple weeks, see if things improve. That's important because their habitat can change pretty quickly. Living on the foothills of the Himalayas and other very tall mountains, their habitat is very prone to things like natural disasters, landslides, droughts, fires, all sorts of things. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Breeding season is typically between like January and March, and then births are usually between May and July. And they kind of try to make that happen so that when the babies are born, it's the best time for the bamboo to be at its most profitable time. In addition to the new leaves that they'll eat, they will also eat the shoots or new growth coming out of the ground of the bamboo, and that is particularly tender and easy to chew, and they want those to be available for their babies as their babies start eating solid food. So they kind of try to get babies to be born in that window of time when the bamboo is sending up new shoots. Right before the babies are born, the mom will choose a den site, a little nest. She'll usually seek out a hollow in a tree or a stump, maybe some rock crevices, a tiny little cave, a place where there's really thick brush, and she'll kind of prepare a little nest with some leaves, some twigs, some of her own hair, and make it a nice little soft bed area. She gives birth usually to 2 babies, sometimes 3, sometimes 1, but 2 is kind of the common number, and they are super fluffy when they are born. Kind of like a puppy or a kitten. They're born with their eyes closed, their ears closed, and it's usually about 2 to 3 weeks before those open up, and then 2 months or so before they're kind of up and about and exploring with their mom. They will typically nurse till they're about 4 months old. Sometimes that's a little shorter, sometimes it's a little longer, depending on nutrition and depending on the quality of the bamboo in the area. And then at about 5 months old, they are already almost the size of their mom. So they can grow pretty quick if conditions are right. And then typically they leave their mom's side at about the year mark and are considered a mature adult about at 1.5 years or so. In the wild, red pandas can typically live between 8 and 10 years, which is kind of a short time, but they're not a very big animal, so that kind of makes sense. In a zoo setting, they can typically live a bit longer, into their early teens, maybe 15 as kind of the high end of that range. In a zoo, they get medical care. They don't have to search for their own food. They don't have to worry about predators or disease and competition with others. Out in the wilds, even though they are a carnivore, they do have to worry about predators. All sorts of things in those forests would try to eat them. Depending on where they're living in their range, there's leopards, there's tigers, there's snow leopards, there's smaller cats in some of those areas. There's some wolves in some of those areas. There's some wild dogs called dholes. There's some jackals. So any of those animals could possibly be a threat. Plus there's also some big snakes in some of that area that would definitely go after the babies, and some birds of prey. So they do have to be very alert for other predators out there that may try to eat them. Red pandas, unfortunately, are listed as endangered. Their population has been on the decline for about 40 years. It is estimated that there are between 2,500 and maybe as many as 10,000 adults across their range of 5 different countries. It's a little unsure because they live solitary, it's hard to track them, and you're dealing with 5 very different countries who have very different outlooks on how to protect their environment, who they let in to observe scientific things, how they protect the habitat. All of those things come into play. Red pandas are protected on an international level, but some of those local governments, the national governments, do not protect them and do not protect their forested areas so much. So it kind of depends on the country they live in, what kind of protection they get. In addition to that, they are hunted illegally in many parts of their range for 3 different reasons. In some areas, they're hunted for their skins. They have a beautiful coat. It's pretty dense hair, so it can be pretty warm. People sometimes wear it. They use it as decoration. So they are hunted for their pelt. In places in southern China, they eat them. In some of the other countries, they eat them as well, so they are sometimes hunted for food. And then they are sometimes captured in some of their areas and sold alive as pets, or to people who are trying to, like, hey, come visit my shop and look, I have this wild animal you can see and you can feed it and you can pay me money to do so, kind of thing. So they are sometimes captured alive and sold as like a pet trade kind of thing. In addition to that, their biggest threat is habitat loss, as the forests that they live in are very prime habitat for the red pandas, but it's also near the edge of the area where people live. So they're chopping down the forest to use the wood. They're chopping down the big trees for lumber. They're chopping down the bamboo and some of the smaller things to feed to other animals, or to replace them and grow crops in that area, or raise their cattle, goats, or sheep in that area. So there's all sorts of other reasons why their forest is getting chopped down. But logging is a big part of the problem. And when they build a road, red pandas don't like to come to the ground at all. So if there's a road in the area, now they have to come down to the ground and cross a road, which can be very dangerous for them because they're little guys and they are very apprehensive about crossing places. And that causes things like habitat fragmentation, where maybe the boy red panda on this side of the road and the girl red panda on this side of the road don't want to cross that road to find each other to breed with, and that can cause all sorts of population issues. In addition to that, climate change as the world continues to warm is a huge issue in their habitat. Their forest is extremely vulnerable to things like fires, droughts, flooding, mudslides, landslides, and then just general climate change can really impact things like plants like bamboo. Bamboo's kind of a very, bamboo's glorified grass. It's in the grass family. It can grow really fast when conditions are right, but if the conditions change, it has a very hard time adapting, and huge sections of the bamboo can die out really quickly and may never come back to that area. So that can be a huge problem in parts of their range as well. There are some great people doing a lot of work to help protect red pandas. Our special shout out today goes out to an organization called the Red Panda Network. They're doing a lot of really good work trying to work with the different governments to control and help limit the poaching, the illegal catching. Sometimes they're caught illegally by traps that are set for other animals. But all sorts of things, they're trying to minimize that and protect some of those habitats. They have succeeded in creating protected forest in 4 of the 5 areas where red pandas live, so that is a good thing. But more protection is still needed if they're going to help protect them long term. In the United States, there is a very good, well-established breeding program in zoos. You can see red pandas in a number of different zoos. I myself have not worked with red pandas because I have worked at zoos that get very hot. Red pandas do not do well with heat. So they typically live in zoos that have a cooler climate and in a zoo where they can grow bamboo nearby. So although we can grow bamboo in LA, it gets too hot in LA, so we cannot have red pandas at the LA Zoo. I have seen pandas at a number